I am totally illiterate. Philosophy is easy. Anyone could do it. Totally illiterate.
We ended like at a really cool place, I thought, to end. A few things that just talking to folks about. So just there are a few things that like people maybe are sort of unsure to ask about that are definitely worth asking about. So for example, just to a few things that we should definitely follow and not think that we know what they mean as we're moving through the text, even if we feel like we do. So for anybody, so I think that, for example, a few words like presence is a word that we could definitely say more about. Um,
Struggling with that one last time.
Sorry, what now?
I was struggling with that one last time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I still struggle with, I mean, when people ask me what presence is, I'm like, I don't know, man, it's like presence. So it's like it's a word that I definitely never felt and still don't feel comfortable with. In a certain way, you'll never feel comfortable with it, but I think we could say more about it than we did last time and sort of definitely spend a little more time foregrounding it in the sort of general importance it has. So if a few things to say about presence. So I kind of liked it more when it let me write here, but here's what I'll do. Here's what I do. Okay. If I just add text, right? That's like what's going on? Okay. I'll figure it out, but we'll just add comment. Okay. For some reason, I'm now adding over here, which I don't like as much. Okay. So
Yeah.
if,
What happened to the little box?
yeah, the little boxes were great. I don't know what happened to the little boxes. We'll get the little boxes back or die trying, sort of. But for now, we'll do this just for this moment. But if we're talking about presence, so so this is not a sort of new Derrida or sort of new. This is like a definitely Heidegger copy pasta, and Heidegger has this famous macro narrative of philosophy that Derrida is going to sign on to with some tweaks, but very much sign on to, which is that philosophy, as varied as it has certainly been from Plato to, for Heidegger, it's like Plato to Nietzsche. Heidegger thinks Nietzsche is like as an attempt at inverting metaphysics is like metaphysics completion. Derrida doesn't sign up for that. Derrida is probably something like Plato to Hegel, but something in this very large historical scansion, right? So this is like, 2,500 years or so, Plato and even pre-Socratics-ish. Exactly where it starts, obviously, is hard, but generally comfortable saying just Plato, pre-Socratics-ish to Derrida. That's like 2,500 years, right? And basically the argument is going to be that, people have heard that being is masterword of philosophy, right? And, your average philosophy class is going to start with, all right, philosophy is, I don't know. I know people have been in analytic classes where they don't start that. I don't know, but just for classes that deal with actual philosophy, people start generally with philosophy is the study of being, etc. And so Heidegger's famous interpretation is Greeks determine being as presence. So when people are talking about the West and stuff, like the basic argument of why this is like philosophy is Western and why philosophy is thought as coming from the West as West focused is going to be that like no non-Western, so no non-Indo-European language has a word for being that is as versatile and insane as the Western one, right? So this is the argument from the Heideggerian perspective is going to be something like the 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 Western sort of, I don't know, adventure is a weirdly benign word to say for like the Western adventure of the whole history of colonialism and Western sort of, and today, right, it's over, right? The West won. There's no non-Western society. There's no non-Western conceptuality. There's no non-Western constitution. That's all over. There's no outside of the West. So, for example, the CCP Chinese Communist Party is as Western an institution as can be. It's a Marxist vanguard party that justifies itself entirely in Western terms and is as against Chinese or Eastern culture as any entity could be, right? Totally Western party. It's not East versus West and sort of China versus America, etc. It's an internal dispute within the West. Okay, so like, and the argument's going to be like Heidegger through close reading of the philosophical tradition sort of draws out a universal valuation of presence. So at one point, Heidegger will be like, take Hegel and Husserl, couldn't be more different in terms of how they proceed, in terms of what they think philosophy is, in terms of, the people who study Husserl or who study Hegel are never the same people. It's a very divided camp. Couldn't be more different, but on the level of presence, couldn't be more the same. Okay, and so every masterword of philosophy, so substance, essence, meaning, the good. So when we're talking about the eidos, the eidos and the good are going to be more present to speech than they are to writing, right? Just like everything, writing is cursed by absence and is a sort of absence pharmakon. Like good writing is writing that sort of de-writings itself, right? Which we talked about last time. De-absences itself, gets closer to the original, gets closer to the soul and the spoken enunciation. So speech is still a sort of not close enough, but it's closer than writing. And so the whole concept of the sign, so again, sign is signifier, signified. That's the sort of a priori core of the concept of the sign that Derrida argues is pretty consistent, remarkably consistent, Plato to Hegel, is founded on and indissociable from metaphysics of presence, right? So, which is also, as we talked about, an ontotheology. So why is it an ontotheology? Because it's not just about being, that's the onto part, right? It's also about purity and then a fall. So purity of logos in proximity to itself in the soul of the speaker versus writing as bastard, non-present sign of a sign. So when I post it. But yeah, that would be the sort of trying to get a quick sort of review. Is there anything that people about presence and this just Pharmakon see, like it doesn't, I don't know what it is about like talking about philosophy texts that make it so you can't use a computer. Like I can use a computer, like I've used a computer for a long time, but I always feel like I can't when I'm doing this. But any thoughts about, or any just general stuff we've been talking about that people feel like is not clear enough before going forward? And you can bring stuff up later if necessary. Okay, cool. Well, just please feel free to interrupt me. It's okay to be reticent to, really. It's a Discord reading group with people you know is a funny context. So it's like I understand people. I feel nervous right now, nervous to talk. So it's natural too. I fight for it for the drugs. I'm excited about drug. Oh, we're gonna get to talk about hemlock. Okay, awesome. Okay. So about right here. Does anybody mind reading this section for us about right here to here?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Operating through seduction, the Pharmakon makes one stray from one's general, natural habitual paths and laws. Here it takes Socrates out of his proper place and off his customary track. A ladder had always kept him inside the city. The leaves of writing act as a pharmakon to push or attract out of the city the one who never wanted to get out, even at the end, to escape the hemlock. They take him out of himself and draw him onto a path that is properly an exodus. Idris, Anyone would take you, as you say, for a foreigner being shown the country by a guide, and not a native. You never leave town to cross the frontier, nor even, I believe, so much as set foot outside the wall. Socrates, you must forgive me, dear friend. I'm a lover of learning. Trees, an open country won't teach me anything. Right on.
Sorry, I'm putting my cursor over what you're saying.
Someone.
Oh, okay. It's not my fault.
Yeah. You must forgive me, dear friend. I'm a lover of learning, and trees and open country won't teach me anything, whereas men in the town do. Yet you seem to have discovered a drug for getting me out. A hungry animal can be driven by dangling a carrot. Okay, wait, should I have read that?
No. Go on. It's all good. No, don't worry about it.
Hungry animal can be driven by dangling a carrot or a bit of green stuff in front of it. Similarly, if you proffer me speeches bound in books, I don't doubt you can cart me all around Attica and anywhere else you please. Anyhow, now that we've got here, I propose for the time being to lie down, and you can choose whatever posture you think most convenient for reading and proceed.
Thank you. So, oh my gosh, we got it's the word. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this, by the way, if people don't know, this is like the very beginning of the Phaedrus. So like this is like Phaedrus and Socrates run into each other outside of the city, and they're like, "Oh, hey, what's up? Why are you out here?" Okay, and then they're walking out, or maybe I forget. Do they run each other on the inside or on the outside? Anyway, the reason why they're outside though is that Socrates is led by a drug, a pharmakon, and again, this is always like translated as something. So Derrida's like, dude, just translate it as drug. Just translate it as drug. And it's weird that people don't translate it because drug keeps everything. And drug is the same in French. It's plug. It's the same word. So, consistent thought there. Okay. I think we can keep going a little bit before we sort of consolidate and talk. But I'll go ahead and read the next two paragraphs then. And by the way, if anybody wants to stop and mark something or like talk about something, always free to do that, please. Oh, we're going to get some present stuff too. It's all coming together, folks. Okay. It is at this point when Socrates has finally stretched out on the ground and Phaedrus has taken the most comfortable position for handling the text, or, if you will, the Pharmakon, but that the discussion actually gets off the ground. Oh, it gets off the ground, stretched out on the ground. I don't know if that pun's in the French, but Yahoo. A spoken speech, whether by Lysias, this is the speech that Phaedrus has brought, or by Phaedrus in person, a speech proffered in the presence of Socrates, would not have had the same effect. Only the logoi and biblois, only words that are deferred, reserved, enveloped, rolled up, words that force one to wait for them in the form and under cover of a solid object, letting themselves be desired for the spaceful walk. Only hidden letters can thus get Socrates moving. So, right, if encountering Phaedrus, obviously, Phaedrus was just saying the speech, it wouldn't have the seductive effect. And the word seduction is, this famously Phaedrus, Socrates, this is like a very flirtatious interaction, right? If you read it. Although some classicists truly bizarrely try to deny there's anything flirtatious about it. It's a very strange confession of a pathology. Not all of them, though, not all of them. If a speech could be purely present, unveiled, naked, offered up in person in its truth, without the detours of a signifier foreign to it, if at the limit an undeferred logos were possible, it would not seduce anyone. It would not draw Socrates, as if under the effects of a pharmakon, out of his way. Let us get ahead of ourselves. Already, riding the pharmakon, going or leading astray. And then I'll just do this paragraph too. And then we can talk a little bit about translation. But this is all stuff we've covered before. So that's why we're going to be able to, after our first sort of introductory day, we're able to go a bit faster. It's exciting. It's fun to go fast. In our discussion of this text, we have been using an authoritative French translation of Plato, the one published by Guillaume Boudet. In the case of the Phaedrus, the translation is by Léon Robin. We'll continue to refer to it, inserting the Greek text in parentheses, however, whenever it seems opportune or pertinent to our point. Hence, for example, the word pharmakon, in this way, we hope to display in the most striking manner the regular ordered polysemy that it has, through skewing, indetermination, or overdetermination, but without mistranslation, permitted the rendering of the same word by remedy, recipe, poison, drug, filter, etc. It will also be seen to what extent the malleable unity of this concept, or rather its rules and the strange logic that links it with the signifier, has been dispersed, masked, obliterated, and rendered almost unreadable, not only by the imprudence or empiricism of the translators, but first and foremost by the redoubtable, irreducible difficulty of translation. It is a difficulty inherent in its very principle, situated less in the passage from one language to another, from one philosophical language to another, than already, as we shall see, in the tradition between Greek and Greek, a violent difficulty in the transference of a non-philosopheme into a philosopheme. With this problem of translation, we will thus be dealing with nothing less than the problem of the very passage into philosophy. So just one important key thing here, like Derrida is rude about like translators, right? Like he's saying like they fucked up, right? They're dumb, right? There's definitely like that going on. But it's never explanatory enough, right, to just be like, hey, the translators are dumb, or the translators were like imprudently empiricists. So in that context of translation, that would be like they just looked at the dictionary and they were like, hey, the word sometimes means this. Hey, maybe here it means that. That makes it make sense here, right? So they were imprudently empiricist in that they never stepped back and were like, what is the necessary unity of the concept of Pharmakon, right? But it's not just that, right? It's not just from one philosophical language, Greek, to another, French. It's also just within Greek itself, Pharmakon doesn't sit easily, right? It's not like in Greek itself, everyone translated it sort of internally, Pharmakon to Pharmakon, drug to drug, and everything was okay. There's a certain non-philosophy of Pharmakon. Pharmakon, right, is going to exceed philosophy. It's going to exceed philosophy and yet be, remember when we talked about philosophy being like drug money? Philosophy is going to exceed philosophy and also be a necessary condition of possibility of philosophy, right? So there's a certain problem of translation that is structural and necessary, not just like this or that translator screwing up, right? Okay, yeah, so any thoughts or questions before and we move on? I genuinely like cannot use this. Like, okay, that's kind of what I want. I just grab it. Okay, does anybody mind reading this next paragraph for us?
I can read.
Thanks.
Starting at the Biblia.
Yes, please.
The Biblia that will draw Socrates out of his reserve and out of the space in which he is wont to learn, to teach, to speak, to dialogue, the sheltered enclosure of the city. These Biblia contain a text written by the ablest writer of our day. Not even gonna try.
Yeah, you don't have to read it. That's fine.
His name is Phaedrus is keeping the text, or if you will, the Pharmakon, hidden under his cloak. He needs it because he has not learned the speech by heart. This point is important for what follows, the problem of writing being closely linked to the problem of, quote, knowing by heart. Before Socrates has stretched out onto the ground and invited Phaedrus to take the most comfortable position, the latter had offered to reconstitute, without the help of the text, the reasoning, the argument, and the design of Lysias' speech. It's Dianoia. Socrates stops him short. Well, my dear fellow, but you must first show me what it is that you have in your left hand under your cloak, for I surmise that that is the actual discourse. Between the invitation and the start of reading, while the Pharmakon is wandering about under Phaedrus' cloak, there occurs the evocation of the pharmacia and the send-off of the myths.
Thank you. Do you mind reading actually the next two paragraphs too?
Cup.
Yep.
It is after all by Kant or by harmonic that even before the overt presentation of the Pharmakon arises in the middle of the myth of Theuth, the connection between the Biblia and the Pharmakia should already be mentioned in a malevolent or suspicious vein. As opposed to the true practice of medicine founded on science, we find, indeed, listed in a single stroke, empirical practice, treatments based on the recipes learned by heart, mere bookish knowledge, and the blind usage of drugs. All of that, we are told, springs out of mania. I expect they would say the man is mad. He thinks himself a doctor by picking up something out of a book or coming across a couple of ordinary drugs without any real knowledge of medicine. This association between writing and the Pharmakon seems external. It could be judged artificial or purely coincidental. But the intention and intonation are recognizably the same. But one and the same suspicion envelops the single embrace, the book and the drug. Writing whatever works in an occult, ambiguous manner, open to empiricism and chance, governed by the ways of magic, not the laws of necessity. Books, the dead and rigid knowledge shut up in biblia, piles of histories, nomenclatures, recipes, and formulas learnt by heart. All of this is as foreign to living knowledge and dialectics as the Pharmakon is to medical science. And the myth to true knowledge, in dealing with Plato, who knew so well on occasion how to treat its myths in archaeological or paleological capacity, one can glimpse the immensity and difficulty of this last opposition. The extent of the difficulty is marked out. This is, among 100 others, the example that retains us here. That in that truth, the original truth about writing as Pharmakon will be at first left up to a myth, the myth of Theuth, to which we now turn. I'm so sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you. So it's a lot of text, and I think that, like, just going through the points here, it's a lot of stuff we've already talked about, but it's basically, in general, Derrida is trying to justify this centrality of writing Pharmakon to, like, remember we talked about how there's no real proposed in classics, in the best journals that you want to publish in, if you're going to be a classicist and you're going to be like a professor of classics at Oxford, God bless you, you are never, there is general mystification before the Phaedrus as to why is this one dialogue, what unites this dialogue. Doesn't it seem like the early stuff, this Lysias discussion, this Lysias speech, these myths isn't it a bunch of things organized together that don't really seem to fit? And so Derrida here is developing and justifying his argument about how central this question of writing as a Pharmakon, text as a Pharmakon are to the Phaedrus from beginning to end, right? And so this initial context is we have Phaedrus, who's got under his cloak, right, this scroll, right? So they had, they didn't doom scroll, but they didn't really have books, right? They had scrolls. And Socrates, and he's like, hey, I can just tell you what Lysias said. I remember it. And Socrates is like, well, wait, no. First, you have to show me, because I think the actual speech, so the written down speech, is under your cloak. And after Socrates notices this, and before he actually starts reading out Lysias's speech, there's the Pharmakia and beginning of the myth stuff we just talked about. So we haven't gotten to the myth of Theuth. We haven't gotten to that at all yet, but we're already talking about Pharmakon. We're already talking about Pharmaka. We're already talking about graphine, right? And the discussion later on of expertise and of good doctors, bad doctors, is a difference between writing, drug user, sort of ordinary drug user, just like somebody who just read about in books. I think of this like this is a real person that existed, but there was a famous sort of con person who like snuck onto a cruise at one point and like pretended to be the head of surgery, like impersonated the head of surgery on this cruise ship for like a year. And just whenever they had to do a surgery on the ship, which apparently happened a few times, this person would just read the medical textbook on the surgery and just like skim it right before the surgery, and then would go to and do the surgery and would consistently do it successfully. when this person was discovered later on, everyone on the ship was like, no, he was the head surgeon. There's no way he's impersonating anyone. He helped us so much. That'd be sort of a Pharmakon book learning sort of impersonator, sort of crazy person rather than a real doctor, rather than a doctor who through experience, through living knowledge, through living dialectics would have the expertise of being a doctor. And so Derrida's fighting against this argument that like, okay, all this Pharmakon stuff, well, sure, they called writing a Pharmakon. Sure, they were talking about drugs and medical science. Sure, all these oppositions go pretty much as you say, so Derrida, but maybe it's still a coincidence. Maybe it's still just sort of random, right? And it just becomes less and less convincing that Derrida is just being a crazy French guy talking about the Pharmakon writing stuff. Yeah. Any thoughts, any questions, any confusions, stuff to point on to before we move on to the Theuth myth, the invention of writing?
So, is the problem of knowing by heart the same problem as like being a fake doctor?
Yeah, so it's at least very closely related. Yeah, so like a real doctor, right, would not need to be consulting the books, needing to reread the recipes, right? A real doctor would it's sort of like, when if doctors have ever scolded you for like, don't go online to check symptoms, don't go online, don't go to ChatGPT, right? Go to a real doctor who like knows medicine by heart versus somebody who just needs a text or text that needs a text, right? Like ChatGPT does. Yeah, so it's the same set of oppositions. Yeah. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
And
Yeah.
the chat GPT in this situation would be writing itself as opposed to like thinking or
Yeah. So in this situation, ChatGPT is kind of like the ultimate platonic monster, right? In my reading, like it's like we're gonna go into like how Plato like criticizes writing for not responding, not being able to talk back. ChatGPT is like writing just like reading itself and writing finally like coming alive and being able to respond, right? So it's terrifying for Platonism. It's like no, it's and especially when ChatGPT like is a better doctor sometimes than your doctor, right? I'm sure, I'm not defending ChatGPT in all its manifestations, certainly not in its structure, certainly not in like who's in charge of it institutionally, right? There's definitely some weird, evil people who are related to Chat, but I'm just saying like ChatGPT is the ultimate nightmare of Platonism, right? And the ultimate nightmare of writing being able to write itself and respond and even be closer to the truth than speech. I don't know if others have had the experience of talking to ChatGPT and it being better than a so-called expert at something, but that's why it's so terrifying now, I think, for so many, big part of it. Again, not affirming ChatGPT and all of its implications, all of its structure, all of its economics, but yeah, it is the greatest nightmare Platonism could ever have in my reading.
I see. Thank you.
Sorry, what?
I said thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure. No problem. Thank you. Okay. So who would like to read our next part? Maybe. Thank you.
Up to this point in the dialogue, one can say that the Pharmakon and the Grapheme have been beckoning to each other from afar, indirectly sending back to each other, and, as if by chance, appearing and disappearing together on the same line, for yet uncertain reasons, with an effectiveness that is quite discreet and perhaps after all unintentional. But in order to lift this doubt, and on the supposition that the categories of the voluntary and the involuntary still have some absolute pertinence in a reading, which we don't for a minute believe, at least not on the textual level on which we are now advancing, let us proceed to the last phase of the dialogue, to the point where Theuth appears on the scene.
Okay, thank
This
you.
time-
Oh, could you, sorry. Could we just pause for one second? Yeah, but just 1 second. So like on this intentional, unintentional thing, right? So like the Derridian claim, it's not that like, okay, Plato had this idea of what Pharmakon is so cool. What I can do is I can like write this dialogue and it will be secretly united by the Pharmakon and by writing. And I'm so smart and I'm going to put this puzzle secretly in the dialogue. And then, nobody's going to get it until some Algerian French guy takes enough amphetamines and reads Plato all day, every day. And no one will get it until then. The claim is not that. The claim is it doesn't matter. Probably Plato did not realize this systematic unity. And is Derrida's admission. And at that point, that's kind of when classicists check out and are like, okay, well, you're not even talking about what Plato wanted, so I don't care. Okay, well, the claim is much more of a reading, sort of a scientific reading perspective, scientific in a very broad deconstructive sense of like, okay, we have this phenomenon of the Phaedrus. We have a phenomenon of the Phaedrus that unifies based on writing. How do we account for it? How do we account for it? Well, the only way to account for its unity is to examine this structural unity of Pharmakon and writing that Plato was sort of a passive vessel for. That Plato, the person, the guy, was a witness to in an unintentional way, sort of. He didn't know what he was doing, as every great writer arguably doesn't really know what they're doing, right? So that's just a quick sort of thing. So yep, if yeah, could you please go on, Riki? Thank you.
Okay. This time it is without indirection, without hidden mediation, without secret argumentation that writing is proposed, presented, and asserted as a Pharmakon. In a certain sense, one can see how this section could have been set apart as an appendix, a superadded supplement. And despite all that calls for it in the preceding steps, it is true that Plato offers it somewhat as an amusement, and walls over, or rather a dessert. All the subjects of dialogue, both themes and speakers, seem exhausted at the moment the supplement, writing, or the Pharmakon are introduced. Then we may feel that we have said enough both about the art of speaking and about the lack of art. And yet it is at this moment of general exhaustion that the question of writing is set out. And as was foreshadowed earlier by the use of the word ashkron, the question of writing opens as a question of morality. It is truly morality that is at stake, both in the sense of the opposition between good and evil, or good and bad, and in the sense of mores, public morals and social conventions. It is a question of knowing what is done and what is not done. This moral disquiet is in no way to be distinguished from questions of truth, memory, and dialectics. This latter question, which will quickly be engaged as the question of writing, is closely associated with the morality theme, and indeed develops it by affinity of essence and not by superimposition, but within a debate rendered very real by the political development of the city, the propagation of writing, and the activity of the sophists and speechwriters. The primary accent is naturally placed upon political and social proprieties. The type of the arbitration proposed by Socrates plays within the opposition between the values of seemliness and unseemliness. But there remains the question of propriety and impropriety in writing. That is to say, the conditions which make it proper or improper. Isn't that so?
Do you mind going on a little bit? Maybe to
Yeah.
here? Thank you.
I didn't read it. Yeah. Is writing seemly? Does the writer cut a respectable figure? Is it proper to write? Is it done? Of course not, but the answer is not so simple, and Socrates does not immediately offer it on his own account in a rational discourse or logos. He lets it be heard by degrading it to an echo, to a well-known rumor, to hearsay evidence, to a fable transmitted from ear to ear. I can tell you what our forefathers have said about it, but the truth of it is only known by tradition. However, if we could discover that truth for ourselves, should we still be concerned with the fancies of mankind?
Yes, please. Then we can. This will be a nice ending spot for this sec. Yeah.
The truth of writing, that is, as we shall see, the non-truth, cannot be discovered in ourselves by ourselves, and is not the object of a science, only of a history that is recited, a fable that is repeated. The link between writing and myth becomes clearer, as does its opposition to knowledge, notably the knowledge one seeks in oneself by oneself. And at the same time, through writing or through myth, the genealogical break and the estrangement from the origin are sounded. One should note most especially that what writing will later be accused of, repeating without knowing, here defines the very approach that leads to the statement and determination of its status. One thus begins by repeating without knowing, through a myth, definition of writing, which is to repeat without knowing. This kinship of writing and myth, both of them distinguished from logos and dialectics, will only become more precise as the text concludes. Having just repeated without knowing that writing consists of repeating without knowing, Socrates goes on to base the demonstration of his indictment of his logos upon the premises of the akko, upon structures that are readable through a fabulous genealogy of writing. As soon as the myth has struck the first blow, the logos of Socrates will demolish the accused.
Great, thank you. Okay, so wow, we finished the first section, Pharmakia. This is like huge. So we've gotten through a lot. So like, so please interrupt me in anything through this, but just the main strands of the argument here. So part of the suspicion, right? Part of the reason why Derrida is hedging against this, like, yeah, but how could you really say it's so important to the text when the myth of Theuth, right? The myth of Theuth is going to be the cicadas was at the beginning, and it was like we got to writing through it, Pharmakia, and through the kind of context. It's not as clear, right? The centrality of writing in that context. Derrida is still adamant that it's quite clear, but the myth of Theuth, right? Nobody is where Derrida's like everyone will say, hey, Derrida's got a lot of game reading the Theuth myth. And the reason is we have the myth of Theuth is explicitly like how writing got invented, and it's called a Pharmakon. But classicists and everyone else, I mean, anybody who's sort of a little skeptical of Derrida's reading, which is, of course, always okay to be, are like, hey, but everything's finished when we finally bring up the Theuth myth, like a lot of people don't even get to this part of the dialogue. They're just like, because all of the main characters, all of the main themes are sort of exhausted. And they're like, okay, we're done talking. And then, oh, wait, we're bringing up morality. We're bringing up how to write. And we're bringing up in this context of morality overwhelmingly, and this question of politics and the action of basically lawyers and the sophists. So when you say type of arbitration, it's both the arbitration of Socrates deciding, hey, what's good writing, what's bad writing, and also the arbitration of ancient Greece. Was one of the things that ancient Greece, something it had in common with America, was it's a very litigious society. Lots of suing people. Everyone was suing each other all the freaking time. And the suing and the lawyers and the sophistry of suing, that's kind of the context that Phaedrus and Socrates are talking about writing in this context. Right. And so in the end, when we're going to talk about writing, we're going to, so Derrida is continuing to put pressure on, wow, in order to talk about writing, Socrates needs recourse both to the form of myth, because he doesn't know sort of where writing was invented, and he's like, I don't know, I just have to repeat without knowing. Socrates will, by the way, consistently describe himself as somebody who just repeats without knowing. I'm so dumb, I don't know anything. I just am repeating things that I've heard without really knowing where they came from. A lot like ChatGPT. If you ask ChatGPT where it gets its knowledge, it'll say, I don't know. I just repeat it. I don't know. You ask somebody who knows, I don't know. Socrates very much has a similar orientation. And this is the definition of, part of the definition of writing, to repeat without knowing, which is very close, not unrelated to the definition we've been exploring as sign of a sign, right? And Derrida's argument is things are set up to judge, and philosophy is set up to decide as guilty that which it needs. So philosophy is set up to be, by essence, a war on drugs, sort of a war on drugs as a war on writing. And Derrida, at one point in one of his little drug texts, he has a little text on drugs, says philosophy is by essence a war on drugs. And this would be that argument. So any thoughts, any questions before we get to the actual writing myth, which is when we get a lot of guitar solo from Derrida. This is like, is this making sense? Is this all followable? Does this feel approachable?
Yeah, it feels very clear for me.
Okay. Okay, just feel free to interrupt me or stop at any time, right? No obligation either. I think this is going great. I'm excited about it. So we're getting to, this is like, so we've gotten to Derrida going, sort of making presses and making sort of sideways. He has a very sideways approach, like a crab, sideways explanations. Now we're kind of, it's game time. We're gonna cut the king off. We're gonna talk about the Pharmakon. We're taking down the IDOS here. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so this is like the taking on the final boss, or the, maybe not the final boss, but the initial boss and final boss of philosophy. So I will read this beginning here and then probably ask somebody else to read. But 2, the father of Logos. The story begins like this. Socrates. Very well. I heard then at Naucratis in Egypt, there lived one of the old gods of that country, the one whose sacred bird is called the ibis, and the name of the divinity was Theuth. It was he who first invented numbers, and calculation, geometry, and astronomy, not to speak of draughts and dice, and above all, writing. I actually don't know what draughts is, so if anybody knows what that is, I'd like to know. Now, the king of all Egypt at that time was Thamus, who lived in the great city of the upper region, which the Greeks call the Egyptian Thebes. The god himself they call Ammon. Theuth came to him and exhibited his arts and declared that they ought to be imparted to the other Egyptians. And Thamus questioned him about the usefulness of each one, and, as Theuth enumerated, the king blamed or praised what he thought were the good or bad points in the explanation. Now, Thamus is said to have had a good deal to remark on both sides of the question about every single art. It would take too long to repeat it here. But when it came to writing, Theuth said, this discipline, tomatema, my king, will make the Egyptians wiser and will improve their memories. My invention is a recipe, Pharmakon, for both memory and wisdom. But the king said, etc. So let us cut the king off here. He is faced with the Pharmakon. His reply will be incisive. Let us freeze the scene and the characters and take a look at them. Writing, or if you will, the Pharmakon. I love how many times there's like, or if you don't mind just calling it a Pharmakon, is thus presented to the king, presented like a kind of present offered up in homage by a vassal to his lord. Theuth is a demigod speaking to the king of the gods, right? Writing god is a secondary god, like Mercury, Hermes, and it's the analogous god in the Greek tradition. But above all, as a finished work submitted to his appreciation. And this work is itself an art, a capacity for work, a power of operation. This artifactum is an art. But the value of this gift is still uncertain. The value of writing, or of the Pharmakon, if you will, has of course been spelled out to the king, but it is the king who will give it its value, who will set the price of what, in the act of receiving, he constitutes or institutes. The king or god, Thamus represents Ammon, the king of the gods, the king of, like we just said this, the king of kings, the god of gods, who says to him, O Basileus, so O emperor, O lord, is thus the other name for the origin of value. The value of writing will not be itself. Writing will have no value unless and to the extent that God the king approves of it. God the king nonetheless experiences the Pharmakon as a product, an ergon, which is not his own, which comes to him from outside but also from below, and which awaits his condescending judgment in order to be consecrated in its being and value. God the king does not know how to write, but the ignorance or incapacity only testifies to his sovereign independence. He has no need to write. He speaks, he says, he dictates, and his word suffices. Whether a scribe from his secretarial staff then adds a supplement of a transcription or not, the consignment is always in essence secondary. So, cool scene, dramatic scene. Okay, so does anybody mind? Okay, so the god king, the father, the super sovereign, is about to respond to like, hey, we should teach the Egyptians writing. It'll help their memories. So again, the value of writing has no value in itself, right? Improving memory is only an improvement of things external to it, right? There's no inherent value to writing, and there's no inherent value to writing also in that it only has value if the king likes it, right? Only if the sovereign, who doesn't need writing in principle, values it, right? So Okay, would somebody mind reading here from this position?
I can.
Thank you.
Also, drafts is a game. It's like checkers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
From this position, without rejecting the homage, the God King will depreciate it, pointing out not only its uselessness, but its menace and its mischief. Another way of not receiving the offering in writing. In so doing, the God King that speaks is acting like a father. The Pharmakon is here presented to the father and is by him rejected, belittled, abandoned, disparaged. The father is always suspicious and watchful toward writing. Even if we did not want to give in here to the easy passage uniting the figures of King, God, and the Father, it would suffice to pay a systematic attention, which to our knowledge has never been done, to the permanence of a Platonic schema that assigns the origin and power of speech, precisely of logos, to the paternal position. Not that this happens especially and exclusively in Plato. Everyone knows this or can easily imagine it. But the fact that Platonism, which sets up a whole Western metaphysics in its conceptuality, should not escape the generality of this structural constraint, and even illustrates it with the incomparable subtlety and force, stands out as all more significant.
Thank you. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Not that Logos is the father ego, but the origins of Logos is its father. One could say the achronously that the speaking subject is the father of his speech, and one could quickly realize that this is no metaphor, at least in not in any the sense of any common conventional rhetoric. Logos is a son, then, and a son would be easily destroyed in his very presence without the present attendance of his father who answers, his father who speaks for him and answers for him. Without his father, he would be nothing but, in fact, writing. At least this is what is said by the one who says it is the father's thesis. The specificity of writing would thus be intimately bound to the absence of a father. Such an absence can, of course, exist amongst very, very diverse modalities, distinctly or confusedly, successively or simultaneously. To have lost one's father through natural or violent death, through random violence or patricide, and then to solicit the aid and attendance, possible or impossible, of the paternal presence, to solicit it directly, or to claim to be getting along without it, etc. The reader will have noted Socrates' insistence on misery, whether pitiful or arrogant, of a logos committed to writing. Quote, it always needs its father to attend it, being quite unable to defend itself or attend to its own needs.
Thank you. So this is like, I don't know if other people heard like a guitar playing in the background as this happened, but this is like a very intense and very big deal or big argument, part of what the Derridian reading of Plato is going to sort of gain its like big stakes from. And the argument is going to be that, first of all, nobody ever, so Derrida is really right, and it's really amazing. Nobody ever noticed this but him. Everybody always knew Plato had this critique of writing, right? But the insistence and necessity of the paternal function in understanding what writing is and how structure and how logos functions insofar as it functions as a father, this is like a incredibly powerful way to understand paternity in general, to understand that when like Derrida is talking about the paternity of logos, or talking about orphans, talking about writing as a bastard son and stuff, there's a tendency, of course, for someone from a philosophical training to be like, okay, well, these are just family metaphors for concepts, right? These are concepts that we have, like the idea, the logos, speech writing, that we then, to understand them, we make these family metaphors, etc. Derrida is going to be very forceful that actually it's not a metaphor, because a metaphor would imply that we know what it is we're talking about when we say father prior to an understanding of logos, prior to an understanding of Platonism. And Derrida is going to be like, no, the question is totally inverted, that it's only Plato and only the Platonic understanding of logos that can teach us what a father is, that can teach us what fatherhood is or what paternity is. He's going to say more or less that very soon. The "this is no metaphor" thing in Derrida is pretty much always this move. Whenever he's saying this is no metaphor, it's not to say this is free of figures, this is free of rhetoric, this is just a literal explanation. He's saying that Derrida is very mistrustful of the concept of metaphor. He thinks it's a very philosophical, very traditional concept. And so when he says that the origin of logos is its father, he's saying this is a structural necessity for understanding logos, that you can't understand logos, nor can you understand paternity, absent this relation between them. And metaphor, so philosophy and Platonism has always treated metaphor and treated rhetoric as something external, where you say, okay, I have my concept in the purity of my knowledge of it. It's present to me. You, the student, I need metaphors to help explain it to you. Derrida's going to be very forceful that it's not a metaphor of paternity that governs this speech writing logos stuff. It's in fact the origin of all paternity. And so that's like the father of logos is going to be both the father of logos as the origin of logos, and the logos father as in relation to the speech orphans, right? So it's both subjective and objective genitive here. So like both love of God and God's love, sort of. But okay, any thoughts or questions here about this so far? This is going to be what Derrida talks about at length, so we're going to talk more about it, but just, I think I went a little fast there because I got excited. But any thoughts or questions? Okay, and one last thing, this Socrates will continue to be like, the problem with writing is it needs its father to attend to it, to specify like what it means, to defend itself with arguments, etc. Again, I think the example of ChatGPT is quite apt, if I may say so myself, that like, if you think about criticism of ChatGPT, which again, I'm not defending unambiguously, but or unconditionally, it's always like, well, ChatGPT is great as long as you have your philosophy professor there to clarify what it says to you, as long as you have your doctor there, as long as you have an expert to legitimate and stamp with the stamp of a father, with the stamp of expertise, the sort of writing machine that you're using. Okay, so I will go ahead and read this next part about this misery starting here. Okay. This misery, the misery of the written text, is ambiguous. It is the distress of the orphan, of course, who needs not only an attending presence, but also a presence that will attend to its needs. But in pitying the orphan, one also makes an accusation against him, along with writing, for claiming to do away with the father, for achieving emancipation with complacent self-sufficiency. From the position of the holder of the scepter, the desire of writing is indicated, designated, and denounced as a desire for orphanhood and patricidal subversion. Isn't this Pharmakon then a criminal thing, a poison present? The status of this orphan, whose welfare cannot be assured by any attendance or assistance, coincides with that of a graphine, which, being nobody's son at the instant it reaches inscription, scarcely remains a son at all, and no longer recognizes its origins, whether legally or morally. So it's easy to think Socrates, who says, I don't know where I got this. ChatGPT says, I don't know where I got this. It's a son that doesn't even know it's a son, thus not a son, whether legally or morally. In contrast to writing, living logos is alive in that it has a living father, whereas the orphan is already half dead. A father that is present, standing near it, behind it, within it, sustaining it with his rectitude, attending it in person in his own name. Living logos, for its part, recognizes its debt, lives off that recognition, and forbids itself, thinks it can forbid itself patricide. But prohibition and patricide, like the relations between speech and writing, are structures surprising enough to require us later on to articulate Plato's text between a patricide prohibited and a patricide proclaimed, the deferred murder of the father and rector. The Phaedrus, I'll go just one more paragraph, and then we'll have separate examples. The Phaedrus would already be sufficient to prove that the responsibility for logos, for its meaning and effects, goes to those who attend it, to those who are present with the presence of a father. These metaphors, again, scare quotes, must be tirelessly questioned. Witness Socrates addressing Eros. If in our former speech Phaedrus or I said anything harsh against you, blame Lysias, the father of the subject. So this is when, the Lysias beginning speech on love, Socrates later talks to Eros and says, if we said anything wrong, Eros, it's Lysias, the origin of this discourse, so don't blame us. Logos, discourse, scare quotes, we can talk about the translation of logos at some point, has the meaning here of arguments, line of reasoning, guided thread animating the spoken discussion, the logos. To translate it by subject, as Robin does, is not merely anachronistic. The whole intention and the organic unity of signification is destroyed. For only the living discourse, only a spoken word, and not a speech's theme, object, or subject, can have a father. And according to a necessity that will not cease to become clear to us from now on, the logoi are the children, alive enough to protest on occasion and to let themselves be questioned, capable too, in contrast to written things, of responding when their father is there. They are their father's responsible presence. So, quick thing here, translating logos has always been a hard thing. It's certainly does not mean logic. Subject, the reason why Derrida doesn't like this subject word to translate it as is because subject is quite external to, subject is too external for what Plato means by logos here. So, translating logos. So, for a long time, i.e. pre-Heidegger, this is another thing that Heidegger really won the argument about, which is like people translated logos as logic. Because, hey, log equal log, why not, right? But here, Derrida's like, so if logos is often translated as calculation, story, subject. Heidegger really likes the translation as language. Ends up meaning for Heidegger that which gathers. Every word ends up meaning that which gathers for Heidegger. He loves gathering. He's like, Easter is his favorite holiday. He's a gatherer. And here Derrida translates implicitly as discourse. And so why is like subject a bad translation? Because subject is still, so the subject of a discourse is still too external. And when he says, because the subject is what it's about, it's not the living presence of a discourse. So the theme, the object or subject, is not the actual spoken word, the actual living discourse, right? So it's hard to translate, but it's living, present, and this is why it's spoken, capable of responding, which writing up until ChatGPT was not capable of responding. Yeah, so just some thoughts about translating logos. Okay, I've talked a lot, so is yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It's
No,
just a
please.
smaller question about what anachronistic means. Like, I have no, because he said that like twice now.
Oh, yeah. So where's the other time he said it? Because I saw it too already.
Way above.
Okay. So here the implicit, so Derrida doesn't explicitly explain why this translation will be anachronistic, but my sort of, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, I don't mean to be faux modest here, I'm pretty sure I know what he means. What he means is like, so the word sujet in French or subject in English is tied up in modern language since about the 16th century with this subject-object distinction, and subject as subject of freedom or the Enlightenment, and subject as that which is free, or that which is a person, or that which is that which decides. So if the Greeks had this concept, or if the Greeks thought in this manner, they never used this word or had a word for subject or spoke in this way. Like they had like anthropos as man. They had, you are, they certainly had words for someone. So they had grammatic words for someone. They had the word that person comes from is the word prosopon, which meant theater mask, which became person in French, English by way of Latin, and by way of the Trinity, right? God as one substance, three prosopon, three persons. But no, it's anachronistic because no Greek word for subject
Oh, yeah.
in any of these senses. Sorry, I kind of buried the lead there a little bit, but yeah, that's why, like, this is like the subject-y you can get. It's inaccurate. So yeah, Greek had word for like subject as topic, but no word for subject as agent of freedom, agent of versus like agent versus patient, right? Agent versus object. It didn't have a word for that. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna get to logos being alive. It's alive. Okay, so the logi are their father's responsible presence. Who wants to read this logoi part? It's Phaedrus' discussion.
I can go.
Thank you.
Okay, some of them, for example, descend from Phaedrus, who is sometimes called upon to sustain them. Let us refer to Robin, who translates logos this time not by subject, but by argument, and disrupts in a space of 10 lines the play of the techne to logon. What is in question is the techne the sophists and rhetors had or pretended to have at their disposal, which was at once an art and an instrument, a recipe, and a cold but transmissible treatise, etc. Socrates considers the then classical problem in terms of the opposition between persuasion and truth. Socrates, I agree. If that is the arguments, logoi, that come forward to speak for oratory, wait, just a second. I agree. If that is the arguments that come forward to speak for oratory, should give testimony that it is an art. Now I seem, as it were, to hear some arguments advancing to give their evidence that it tells lies, that it is not an art at all, but an artless routine. Without a grip on truth, says the Spartan, there can be no genuine art of speaking, either now or in the future. Phaedrus. Socrates, we need these arguments. Bring the witnesses here and let's find out what they have to say and how they say it. Socrates? Come here then, noble brood, and convince Phaedrus, father of such fine children, that if he doesn't give enough attention to philosophy, he will never become a competent speaker on any subject. Now let Phaedrus answer. It is Phaedrus, but this time in the symposium, who must speak first, because he is both head of the table and father of our subject. What we're provisionally and for the sake of convenience, continuing to call a metaphor, thus in any event belongs to a whole system. If logos has a father, if it is a logos, only when attended by its father, this is because it is always a being, and even a certain species of being, more precisely, a living being. Logos as a zoon. An animal that is born, grows, belongs to the physis. Linguistics, logic, dialectics, and zoology are all in the same camp.
I'm so excited.
Describing logos as a zoon, Plato is following. Okay.
No, go ahead. Please keep going. I'm just excited the zoo is mentioned here, but go ahead.
In describing logos as a zoon, Plato is following certain rhetors and sophists before him who, as a contrast to the cadaverous rigidity of writing, had held up the living spoken word, which infallibly conforms to the necessities of the situation at hand, to the expectations and demands of the interlocutors present, and which sniffs out the spots where it ought to produce itself. Feigning to bend and adapt at the moment, it is actually achieving maximum persuasiveness and control. Still further on?
Oh, pardon?
Should I continue?
Do you mind? Yeah. Please.
Okay, I can continue.
Thank you.
Logos, a living animate creature, is thus also an organism that has been engendered. an organism, a differentiated body proper with a center and extremities, joints, a head, and feet. In order to be proper, a written discourse ought to submit to the laws of life just as a living discourse does. Logographical necessity ought to be analogous to biological or rather zoological necessity. Otherwise, obviously, it would have neither head nor tail. Both structure and constitution are in question in the risk run by logos of losing through writing both its tail and its head.
Do you mind just
Socrates?
do you mind just reading this and then we'll stop?
Fine.
Thank you.
And what about the rest? Don't you think the different parts of the speech are tossed in, hit or miss? Or is there really a cogent reason for starting his second point in a second place? And is that the case with the rest of the speech? As for myself, in my ignorance, I thought that the writer boldly set down whatever happened to come into his head. Can you explain his arrangement of the topics in the order he has adopted as a result of some principle of composition, some logographic necessity? Phaedrus, it's very kind of you to think me capable of such an accurate insight into his methods. Socrates, but to this you would surely agree. Every discourse, like a living creature, should be so put together that it has its own body and lacks neither head nor foot, middle nor extremities, all composed in such a way that they suit both each other and the whole.
Okay, thank you. So this is like another, we're getting to like really intense, really fucking cool, in my opinion, at least, argumentation here. And we have a lot of, I forgot that he talked about zoology, but logos as a zoon. People know, just the, there's like these two famous words for living thing in Greek, right? Zoon is like any living entity. And then bios is supposedly like a politically qualified. The distinction is like more complex than this, but zoon is like, that's where zoology comes from. It's any animal, and physis is nature, just BT dubs. So it's like an animal that belongs to nature and grows. And then we have this. So yeah, anything jump out at people to talk about from this that I'm just very excited about it. But sometimes excitement is a barrier to clarity. So just anything jumps out at people, or any questions anyone has about this stuff, we might want to just stop and write it out a little bit, unless people think we're going too slow. But I don't know. I think we're at a good speed.
Too much for me, but
Yeah. Okay, a bit too much. I can feel that. So let's go a little slowly through it. Okay. So I just want it to be a little smaller. Okay, that's fine. We'll go right here. Okay, so we had a bunch of discussion of logos, father, right? And this question of like, the art of logos is the art of speaking or art of persuasion, right? And Socrates and Phaedrus are talking about, how do we speak well? How does one persuade well? And Socrates is going to say, hey, any of the logoi, so logoi are like the children of a discourse, these sort of, it could be like little arguments, etc. And we're that, like, for example, a sophist or a lawyer, we're talking a lot about lawyers in this context, or a rhetorician are going to give, right, in ancient Greece or in Athens, okay? And so how do we distinguish good logoi from bad logoi, good arguments from bad arguments? Well, first of all, like as usual in Plato, we need to say truth, right? We need truth. They need to have truth, right? There can be no genuine art of speaking. We need without truth. So like the art of rhetoric is always going to be, or the art of pharmakons in this context, always subordinate for Plato to philosophy as art of truth and dialectics as discovering the truth, okay? Okay, so that's this section here. Is that clear, Riki? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or
Yes, that
okay,
makes sense. Yes.
okay, okay. So then Derrida's gonna press. Okay, so that's what Plato and Socrates say on an explicit level of conceptuality. Okay, but Derrida's gonna press to say, well, actually, isn't there a structure that determines this sort of that's related to the question of truth and dialectics, but that exceeds it? Isn't this sort of father-loving or paternalism of logos not just a metaphor, but in fact, the structuring, I almost just said metaphor again, not just a metaphor, but the structuring, scare quotes, metaphor of the whole problematic? So writing is, so this is why one might say like writing is separate from the zoo. You would say like, so Plato would say, so for Plato, writing is dead, right? Just like ChatGPT is dead, books are dead, okay? And logos is living being as speech, right? And logos is only alive because and in proximity to its dad, right? So like its father. And so what is the link to the art of rhetoric or the art of debate or the art of speech? Well, classically, and this is something that there's like a footnote in Mein Kampf about this, Hitler loves speech versus writing. So you know deconstruction's right because it explains Hitler. But the basic claim of being good at speaking, and this is why Hitler says he's good at speaking rather than writing. Communists write for him. They write manifestos, they write pamphlets, but the reason Nazism is going to beat communism for Hitler is that it's good at speech and it's good at speaking. And so traditionally, a good speaker, a good debater adjusts to their audience, right? Which bends to their audience, adapts to their audience in a way writing cannot, right? Because it's dead. And so in order to dominate the audience by persuading them, it adapts to them. So it's a faux adaptation, right? A rhetoric, a debater who debates well is not really adapting to the audience. Otherwise, they're not winning their argument, right? They would be totally just in free fall to adapt to the audience. But they adapt to their audience so as to impart to them the logoi they're saying, the animals they're saying, the living spoken word that will adapt to whoever the rhetorician is speaking in front of, right? And so Derrida is going to press and emphasize this organic, living life aspect of logoi, in part to show how it's consistent with all the discussion of rhetoric in the Phaedrus. So in the Phaedrus, there is a big criticism of, so Lysias, if you remember at the beginning, Phaedrus brought that speech in his cloak that he was going to read to Socrates. That speech is going to be repeatedly quoted from and criticized throughout the dialogue. And part of the criticism is here. So when they're so he's talking about Lysias's speech here, and he's saying, doesn't this speech like not have an organic constitution? It starts at the end, it ends at the beginning. It doesn't have an arrangement that is like beginning, middle, and end. So it doesn't have a organic constitution, right? So does that make sense to people? And we're going to link this. Anything that is organic or living has to have a father and is spoken of as having a father in the Platonic understanding in general. And this is what he's going to say here. So this is a really cool part. But does anybody have any? I'll read the next part. Does anybody have any questions about what we've just said? Is that clear? With some gloss.
Anything that is what?
Anything that is living. Anything that is living has a father. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'm getting excited because this is like really intense stuff. But if you don't feel the intensity, or it seems weird to you, or you don't get it, or I'm just rambling or something like that, please interrupt me at any time. Yeah. So Oh, I can't see the chat. So if there's been chat. Oh yeah, Zoo mentioned exactly. That's what we said. Yeah, Zoo is not. Zoo is so central to this. I forgot how central the Zoo was to this text. Like, it's truly incredible to me. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna calm down. Read. All right. I gotta calm down. I'm gonna drink more caffeine to help. That'll relax me. Okay. The organism thus engendered must be well born of noble blood. Gaia. We recall is what Socrates called the logoi, those noble creatures. So Gaia is like genitive, gene, genealogy. That's why this is genetic here. And engendered, Derrida is emphasizing the genetics of the etymologies here. This implies that the organism, having been engendered, must have a beginning and an end, like a good speech, and like any living being. Here, Socrates' standards become precise and insistent. A speech must have a beginning and an end, and it must begin with the beginning and end with the end. It certainly seems as though Lysias, like the crappy speech, remember we're talking about, at least, was far from satisfying our demands. It's from the end, not the beginning, that he tries to swim, on his back, upstream through the current of his discourse. He starts out with what the lover ought to say at the very end to his beloved. The implications and consequences of such a norm are immense, but they're obvious enough for us to not have to belabor them. It follows that the spoken discourse behaves like someone attended in origin and present in person. Logos, as one Platonic, I can't say Latin at all, I never learned Latin. As one Platonic lexicon puts it, like any person, the logos soon has a father. But what is a father? This is like Derrida's going to really go deep in what we said earlier. Should we consider this known, and with this term, the known, classify the other term within what would hasten to classify as a metaphor? This is sort of what I was talking about earlier, that whenever Derrida is suspicious of metaphor or scare quotes the word metaphor, the problem basically is that metaphor pretends that we know a literal term and we are using the metaphor to elucidate an unknown term. And here, if we say, oh, logos is described as a father as a metaphor, the implication of that is we know what a father is prior to logos. And we don't know what a father is prior to logos, Derrida is going to say here. One would then say that the origin or cause of logos is being compared to what we know to be the cause of a living son, his father. One would understand or imagine the birth and development of logos from the standpoint of a domain foreign to it, the transmission of life or the generative relation. Generative, so gene, genetics, genera. But the father is not the generator or procreator in any real sense prior to or outside all relational language. In what way, indeed, is the father-son relation distinguishable from a mere cause-effect relation or generator-engendered relation, if not by the instance of logos? Only a power of speech can have a father. The father is always father to a speaking living being. In other words, it is precisely logos that enable us to perceive and investigate something like paternity. There were a simple metaphor in the expression father of logos. The first word, which seemed the more familiar, would nevertheless receive more meaning from the second than it would transmit to it. The first familiarity is always involved in a relation of cohabitation with logos. Living beings, father and son, are announced to us and related to each other within the household of logos, from which one does not escape in spite of appearances when one is transported by metaphor to a foreign territory where one meets fathers, sons, living creatures, all sorts of beings that come in handy for explaining to anyone that doesn't know, by comparison, what logos, that strange thing, is all about. Even though this earth is the heart of all metaphoricity, father of logos is not a simple metaphor. To have simple metaphoricity, one would have to make the statement that some living creature incapable of language, if anyone still wished to believe in such a thing, has a father. One must thus proceed to undertake a general reversal of all metaphorical directions, no longer asking whether logos can have a father, but understanding that what the father claims to be the father of cannot go without the essential possibility of logos. Logos indebted to a father, what does that mean? At least how can it be read within the stratum of the Platonic text that interests us here? So this is a super important sequence, and it's really hard, and it's not something I would expect anyone to understand immediately. Any questions or thoughts about it? What is this logos metaphor stuff? father stuff.
I just didn't understand it at all.
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. So let's do a little add a comment. What is a father? Or let's add the comment here, okay? So let's go back slowly a little bit through it, because if we get this, we get so much about like what's about to happen, because the Platonic good and the eidos, the father is going to be the figure of the good. So the sort of paternicidal, I like that word, paternicidal, I just made it up. Paternicidal nature of writing is going to be part of what it makes it threat to Platonism, threat to Pharmakon. Okay. So we've just said, okay, a speech is for Plato a living being, right? A logos is a living being. This is why we say logos zoon. Why is it a living being? Well, for a few reasons. It adjusts to its context, so it has the dynamism of life, unlike dead writing. Okay. It is a living being because it is an organism. It is an organism with a defined structure, like a beginning, middle, and end, a head, a tail, feet. So this explicit comparison, every discourse, like a living creature, should be so put together that it has its own body and has a head and a foot, a middle, extremities. So composed in a harmonious, organistic way, right? So speech is a logos, okay? And a logos, the reason why we prefer a spoken logos to a written logos is it's closer to its father. So it has a good, so when it has a good genetics, it has a good generative relation, it's well bred. This is when Socrates says a speech is good if it has noble blood. This is all the genetic stuff that's being pressed here, right? So whereas other stuff, so engendered, it's an organism that's been engendered, and we know its value through its closeness to its father, through its ability to remain closer to the father, right? And so Phaedrus is father of such fine children, talking about the arguments, the logoi. So there's a continual, insistent metaphoric relation, although we're going to get into why it's not just metaphoric relation, between arguments or logoi and the rhetorician, and making sure that the rhetorician or the arguer, the debater, functions as a good father or gives birth to logoi that have a good father, okay? So that's how we get to father. So good logoi have a good father. A good zoo logos is one that stays close to its father. Okay? That's the insistent Platonic comparison and metaphorics. Okay. So then we get to the switcheroo of the metaphor thing. So this general reversal of all metaphorical directions happens with this father of logos thing. Okay, so Derrida says, if we're going to read father of logos, here he says, father of logos, the expression, the first word, father, which seemed the more familiar, it's a little Derrida pun, little joke, familiar, familial, family, father, but also just familiar, as in we know what it means, would nevertheless receive more meaning from the second, logos, then it would transmit to it. So father is the unfamiliar term, actually. Logos is going to tell us what a father is. So why is Derrida saying this? Well, to contrast with a classicist who's like, okay, you know what a logos is? Well, it's like a father, or it's the father, or you are the father of logos when you are a good speaker. Okay, so in that metaphor, assumption is everybody knows what a father is. Just think of your dad, right? Everybody knows what a father is. Everyone knows what a father is. It's a natural, universal, clear entity, word, definition. You know, what's more familiar than family, right? What's more familiar than family and the family structure, right? So this logos thing, which we're struggling to translate of like, does logos mean, it doesn't mean logic, but it kind of can mean argument. It doesn't mean language exactly, but it kind of does. It doesn't mean subject. It really means, we're saying it means living discourse. It's like a living being, et cetera, et cetera. This logos word is mystical even in Greek, right? And it's the key word of all this. So, well, to make it clearer, we can compare it to father. We all know what a father is, right? Well, Derrida's argument is actually we don't really know what paternity is or what a father is or what a paternal relation is prior to understanding what logos is. Actually, logos is going to help demystify or specify the paternal relation rather than the other way around, which would be implied by a simple metaphor of logos as father. Okay, does that help? Is that clearer, or does that help a bit?
Yes, that's definitely clear.
Okay, so the hearth of all metaphoricity and this is all metaphors are this, that's really hard. We can get back to that, I think. For now, just this argument of we're going to figure out what fathers are once we figure out what logos is rather than the reverse. So one of the main arguments here would be like father, son, and it's always about sons, right? It's always about this is why Derrida will use this phrase, phallogocentrism. Logos is always a phallic, always an issue of father and sons, never an issue of mothers or sisters or daughters. But so father, son versus cause and effect or generator engendered, the difference is logos. Okay, the difference is, if you have a cause and effect like, hey, I add oil to water and they separate, that's just cause and effect. If there's no logos, if there's no living discourse, there's no father, is the argument here. That the only way to distinguish between father, son, and other causal relations is something like logos. Yeah, and we're getting to some really cool stuff. I'll just stop one more time because I know this is really not easy. Any other questions or thoughts? If you're confused about something, probably everyone else is too. So don't hesitate to ask about anything or just say something just doesn't make sense. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on to the sort of climax of today? Okay. So someone mind reading, starting with the figure of the father.
I can read.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't even put my glasses on. The figure of the father, of course, is also that of the good. Logos represents what is indebted to the father, who is also chief, capital, and good. Or rather, the chief, the capital, the good. Pater in Greek means all that at once. Neither translators nor commentators of Plato seem to have accounted for the play of these schemas. It is extremely difficult, we must recognize, to respect this play in a translation, and the fact that can at least be explained in that no one has ever raised a question. Thus, at the point in the Republic where Socrates backs away from speaking of the good in itself, he immediately suggests replacing it with, I'm not going to try, its son, its offspring. Let us dismiss for the time being the nature of good in itself. For to obtain my present surmise of what seems to be a pitch above the impulse at the wings of my flight today, but what seems to be the offspring of the good, and most nearly made in its likeness, I am willing to speak to you. Speak if you too wish it, and otherwise let the matter drop. Well, speak on, he said, for you will duly pay me the tale of the parent another time. I could wish, I said, that I were able to make and do receive payment, not merely as now the interest, but at any rate receive this interest and the offspring of the good, which is here associated with blah, 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 and signifies the production of the product birth and the child, etc. This world functions with this meaning in the domains of agriculture, of kinship relations, and of fiduciary operations. None of these domains, as we shall see, lies outside of the investment and possibility of a logos.
Do you mind continuing just these two? Thank you.
As products, is a child, the human or the animal blood, as well as the fruits of the seeds sown in the field, and the interest on a capital investment. It is a return or revenue. The distribution of all of these meanings can be followed in Plato's text. The meaning of pater is sometimes even inflected with the exclusive sense of financial capital. In the Republic itself, and not far from the passage we have just quoted, one of the drawbacks of democracy lies in the role that capital is often allowed to play in it. But these money makers are down-bent heads, pretending not even to see the poor, but inserting the sting of their money into any remainder who do not resist, and harvesting from them in interest, as it were, a manifold progeny of the parent sum, fostered the drone and pauper in the element in the state, and pauper element in the state. Now, about this father, this capital, this good, this origin of value in all appearing beings, it is not possible to speak simply or directly. First of all, because it is no more possible to look them in the face than to stare in the sun. On the subject of this bedazzlement before the face of the sun, a rereading of of the famous passage of the Republic is strongly recommended here.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is so crazy what's happening here. Okay, so the point here is Derrida is arguing is even further generalized. So he's just argued, right, that in order to understand what a father is, we need to understand logos first, right? And then we're not even just going to be understanding the father in Plato. We're going to understand finance, interest. So the interest of an investment has the same word here as can also mean a child or a product, right? Or a return or a revenue on an investment. And so we have also here for Derrida the birth of something like capitalism and the possibility of capitalism in a Platonic reading and thinking of the father. And so Derrida is very famously going to be like, hey, the only person who likes democracy in the whole history of philosophy is me. And this is quite true. Plato hates democracy, as does every single philosopher ever. But democracy is also going to be one where it lets the outpouring of financial capital, the investments, sort of run free, absent the control of a good father, absent the control of the good. And so the father capital, the good, the origin of value and of all appearance is going to be something like, and more than something like, is going to be like the sun. The sun is the source of all visibility, all light in our solar system, pretty much, my understanding, comes from the sun, at least all appreciable amounts of light that we could use to see. And yet the sun itself is not visible. And you all can test this today if you just I know it's late for some of you, but if you just go out and just stare at the sun and then come back and tell us what happened, just keep looking at it until something happens. And then you'll see this will be demonstrated for you very clearly. You can't, this origin is too bright to look directly at it, and yet it conditions all these things. So agriculture, kinship relations. So agriculture is like thinking harvest, thinking I reap what I sow, kinship relations, and finance. So agriculture, family, finance, all of these things cannot be thought of without thinking logos. So not just the West in terms of its conceptuality and in terms of what it thinks about ideas comes from Plato. Everything sort of comes. That's what's so, it's sort of overwhelming, and it is like looking to the sun. Just it's bedazzling. Everything comes from Plato in this reading in a very fundamental way. Any questions or thoughts before we do one more passage before I think we maybe just we call it a day, but any other thoughts or questions, anything unclear at all, or just things you notice? Okay, cool. So I'll read a section here. Again, talking about the sun. So please tell me what happens, folks. If you just like if you really try looking at the sun, you're going to see what Derrida is talking about here. So, thus will Socrates evoke only the visible sun, the sun that resembles the Father, the analogon of the intelligible sun. It was the sun then that I meant when I spoke of the offspring of the good, which the good has created in its own image. Created in its own image, and which stands in the visible world in the same relation to vision and visible things as that which the good itself bears in the intelligible world to intelligence and to intelligible objects. So can't perceive, even in the mind, even in the intellect, the good, right? In Platonism, we just get substitutes and a logo for it. How does logos intercede in this analogy between the Father and the Son? The noumena, the thing itself, and the huromena. So the other of it, so I wouldn't just, but the analog substitutions of itself. The good, in the visible invisible figure of the Father, the Son, or capital, is the origin of all onta, all beings, responsible for their appearing and their coming into logos, which both assembles and distinguishes them. We predicate to be of many beautiful things and many good things, saying of them severally that they are, and so define them in our speech. And so famen te kaidras toi logoi, to logoi, so that's logos in our arguments and our speeches. Yeah, so that's nominative, but still that's just a translation issue. So that's fine that I said in our. Doesn't matter. Yeah, so the point is that logoi is how to be in this quote is thought, and in terms of logo, in terms of what is speech spoken. The good, Father, Son, capital, is thus the hidden, illuminating, blinding source of logos. OMG, OMG, OMG. And since one cannot speak of that which enables one to speak, being forbidden to speak of it or to speak to it face to face, yeah, this is why I'm saying, okay, I was kind of joking earlier. Please don't go look at the sun. One will speak only of that which speaks, and of things that, with a single exception, one is constantly speaking of. And since an account or reason cannot be given of what logos often translated as ratio in the Latin tradition, is accountable or owing to, since the capital cannot be counted, nor the chief looked in the eye, it will be necessary, by means of a discriminative diacritical operation, to count up the plurality of interest, returns, products, and offspring. Well, speak on, he said, for you will duly pay me the tale of the parent another time. I could wish, I said, that I were able to make and you to receive the payment, and not merely as now the interest, but at any rate receive this interest in the offspring of the good. Have a care, however, lest I deceive you unintentionally with a false reckoning of the interest. So I think We can make it to at least here, I think, and then we can finish out. But somebody like to do our last reading for today. We're gonna finish the whole, we gotta finish the whole section. Okay. We might go 1 or 2 minutes over, but I think it'll be okay. If somebody minds finishing out our reading, and then we'll consolidate all this talk.
And
Thank you, Reed.
from there to like all the way to the end. Okay. On the foregoing passage, we should also retain the fact that, along with the account of the supplements to the fatherhood capital, origin, etc., along with what comes above and beyond the one in the very movement through which it absents itself and becomes invisible, thus requiring that its place be supplied, along with difference and dialectics. This covers the ever-open possibility of the kibdalon, that which is falsified, adulterated, mendacious, deceptive. Have a care, he says, lest I deceive you with a false reckoning of the interest. Denoma is fraudulent merchandise. The corresponding verb signifies to tamper with money or merchandise, and, by extension, to be of bad faith. This refers to logos from fear of being blinded by any direct intuition of the face of the Father, of good, of capital, of the origin of being in itself, of the form of forms, etc. This recourse to logos as that which protects us from the sun, protects us under it and from it, is proposed by Socrates elsewhere in the analogous order of the sensible or the visible. We shall quote at length from that text. In addition to its intrinsic interest, the text, in its official Robin translation, manifests a series of slidings, as it were, that are highly significant. The passage in question is the critique, in the Phaedo, of physicalists. Socrates proceeded, I thought that as I had failed in the contemplation of true existence, I ought to be careful that I did not lose the eye of my soul, as people might injure their bodily eye by observing and gazing on the sun during an eclipse, unless they take the precaution of only looking at the image reflected in the water, or in some analogous medium. So in my own case, I was afraid that my soul might be blinded altogether if I looked at things with my eyes or tried to apprehend them with the help of the senses, and I thought that I had better have recourse to the world of idea and seek there the truth of things. So basing myself in each case on the idea, logon, that I judge to be the strongest. Logos is thus a resource. One must turn to it, and not merely when the solar source is present and risk burning the eyes if stared at. One has also to turn away towards Logos when the sun seems to withdraw during its eclipse. Dead, extinguished, or hidden, that star is more dangerous than ever. It will let these yarns of suns and sons spin on for a while. Up to now, we have only followed this line so as to move from Logos to the Father, so as to tie speech to the Kurios, the Master, the Lord, another name given in the Republic to the good Son, capital Father. Later, within the same tissue, within the same texts, we will draw on other filial filaments, pull the same strings once more, and witness the weaving or unraveling of other designs.
Thank you, Ricky. Okay. So this is like more guitar. This is just like a Derrida guitar solo, virtuosity, craziness. But we've gotten to now logos being the only way we can relate to, even for Socrates, to fatherhood, capital origin, and the origin of being itself and the form of forms. Logos functions like a prophylactic, sort of like a sort of guard that, like sunglasses that present us from being blind. Again, don't go look at the sun. That was a joke. A way to prevent us from being blinded by the good in itself, the idea in itself, the Father in himself, capital in itself, right? So, okay. Any questions or thoughts about this ending or these? We went a little fast the end here because I thought it would be cool to finish section 2 because that's a really good speed to be going through this. But any questions, thoughts, things aren't clear, what's going on, anything is fine. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all really for doing this. It's really fun to go back through this. I don't remember this text at all, I'm realizing. And I had forgot about zoology. I forgot about all this stuff, but it's like we're getting to really a lot of people can read signature event context to be like, I kind of know the Derrida argument. Now I think we're getting to a like, you're going to feel more and more like your brain has a sort of software replacement of deconstruction, replacing whatever you've got installed already. And it's really fun and awesome to go through it. So yeah, okay. I will post this online so you can rewatch or whatever. And please, any questions or any ideas or any thoughts, please send to me or post on the server. We're just whatever. But yeah, thanks so much.